Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Alright, let's continue the wonderful book, The World's Greatest Ghosts by Roger Bohr. Once again delving into chapter 6, this time it being part 6, once again dealing with the world of ghosts, of royals, and rulers. The last time I touched this chapter, or this book in of itself, was more than 5 months ago, so I thought I would dust it off here and then be able to give my own thoughts and opinions on this chapter. This part will actually end this chapter altogether, and then we'll be able to see what the next chapter beholds. But overall, a very good chapter so far. One of the longest ones too when it comes to this book. I think the longest one yet. Lots of good information, rich detail that was shared within this chapter. Let me know what you guys and gals think with regards to this particular chapter and all. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start part 6. The first segment is called The White Lady of Bohemia, and then here's what it says. Tiny Peter Vogt was a very special baby. He was born in 1539, the sole heir and last in line of the aristocratic Ronsberg family of South Bohemia. His father, Justa, was desperate that nothing should stop him continuing in a lineage that stretched back for centuries. So he hired a team of nannies to maintain a 24-hour watch on the boy at his home, Krumlov Castle, on the banks of the river Vltava. They were with him constantly, caring for him by day, sleeping in his room at night. One night, one of the nannies woke with a start. The room was strangely bright, glowing with moonlight. As she stared around it, she saw a curious, misty figure that was beside Peter's cradle. Speechless and shaking with fright, she watched the intruder, a woman in white, gaze down at the sleeping child. As the baby started to cry, the woman gently picked him up, cuddled and stroked him, kissed him, and then tenderly placed him back within the crib, and then she disappeared. Still shaking, the startled nanny woke her colleague and told her what she had seen. Gingerly, they crept over to the cradle. Little Peter was sleeping peacefully, a smile between his pink cheeks. And so the two nannies had heard the legend of the White Lady, a ghost said to haunt the castles of the Ronsberg family, but they had dismissed it as folklore. Next night, they both stayed awake to see if this woman returned. The room was locked, the windows shut, but just after midnight, they saw a pale light, and the phantom nanny appeared again. She rocked the cradle, caressed the child, and then, seemingly satisfied that all was well, dissolved into a wall. Each successive night, the two girls waited for the White Lady to appear, and she never let them down. Content that she meant no harm, they took her for granted and did not bother to stay awake afterwards. Then one of the regular nannies fell ill, and a temporary replacement moved in. Nobody told her about the White Lady, and as she lay tossing and turning, unable to sleep, she saw the ghost arrive at her usual time. Next morning, she told one of the other girls what she had seen and was told, "Don't worry, the White Lady takes care of Peter at night." But the girl was worried. What would the master say if something happened to the boy? How could she explain that she had left him in the care of a ghost? And so the next night, she again lay sleepless as the phantom appeared, walked over to the cradle and rocked it. When Peter started to cry, she picked him up. Then the anxious nanny leapt from her bed and walked bravely over to that figure. She grabbed the child from her arms. The White Lady put up no resistance. She stood motionless and then turned to the girl and said sternly, "Do you know what you are doing, bold one? I'm a relative of this newborn child, and it is my right to be with him. You will not see me here anymore." And so the ghost made a cross sign on the wall and then disappeared into it. Peter grew up to inherit the castle when his father died. He was told the story of his mysterious guardian and often discussed her with friends and relatives. One day he decided to check the wall where she had last been seen. Workmen began knocking a hole and they discovered a cache of coins and gems. So who was this caring White Lady? There are two theories. An historian believed that she was Lady Perchta, a Ronsberg who married an aristocrat called Jan Liechtenstein, but he proved cruel and merciless, and eventually she left him and his selfish family and fled over to Krumlov. After she moved to Vienna to live with her daughter and died there in 1746, a portrait of her and her husband still hangs in the castle at Jindřichův there in South Bohemia, which is today a part of Czechoslovakia. Another theory is that the White Lady is Markéta, daughter of the Archduke Maidberchi. She married Jindřich from the Hrádou Castle family, but when he died in 1562, became a recluse at a convent in Krumlov. From time to time, she visited her children and friends, wearing all-white nun's habit. Whoever she was, there are many documented sightings of her in the homes of the Bohemian nobles. Apart from Krumlov, she was seen in castles at Telši, Bechin, Trebon, and Jindřichův Hradci. The accounts of her are always the same. A woman of breeding, all in white, with a hood over her head. She was seen just before anything happened, happy or sad was to happen. If the news was bad, then she wore black gloves instead of white. Workmen renovating part of the Jindřichův Hradci castle once spotted her at a midday there at a window in a tower. They were startled because no one had been in the tower for years, and that staircase had been destroyed by fire. And so they watched her for some time before she slowly faded from sight, as if she was moving across the room. Servants of the castle have often seen her at the corridors at night, sometimes with a bunch of keys hanging at her waist. Her face is always serious but never frightening. As she flowed along landings, opening doors, some servants spoke to her. She would answer with a movement of her head or hand, or even with a few words. The servants believed that she was taking care of the families to whom she was related to, looking after the young, warning the adults of danger, and then preparing the dying for their fate. In 1604, one of the Hradci family, a man called Jachim, fell suddenly ill, but nobody thought his condition could be fatal. Then, on a cold, snowy January night, a priest at the castle woke with a start and thought he heard someone calling him. Dressing hurriedly, he opened his door and then found a woman in white. "Do not waste any time," she said in an urgent voice. "Follow me." And so the priest turned back to look for a light, but the woman took his lantern, breathed on the glass, and a flame flared up. She led the way to the castle chapel, where the astonished priest found candles burning everywhere, as if it was in readiness for a mass. The woman told him to collect everything he needed to perform the last rites. Still puzzled, he did as she directed, and then followed her to Jachim's bedroom door. Here, both she and the light vanished, but by now, the priest realized who she was. He went into the bedroom and found the servants asleep. On the sick bed, Jachim was clearly gravely ill and fighting for his life. And so the priest performed the last rites, and the master, the last of the Hradci line, died in peace. The caring nature of the ghost points to her being Markéta, as Selavish suggested. She was once supervising renovations to part of Jindřichův Hradci castle, and to encourage the workmen, she promised them all sweet pudding when they had finished, and every year after that. When the work was complete by the late autumn, Markéta kept her promise and prepared a great feast. But as the men and their families sat down at long tables in the castle courtyard, snow began to fall on the sweet pudding. The following year, the hostess switched the date of the feast to early spring, and the tradition of feeding the poor on Green Thursday continued throughout her lifetime and the lives of her successors long into the 16th century. And then there's a little mini segment now called Vision of the Abbess. When the Abbess of Laycock told friends that she had seen her son William Longspee in her rooms one night in 1250, they found it hard to believe. For William had left England to join a crusade in the Holy Land and was not expected home for at least another year. But the Abbess said she recognized him from the insignia on the shield of an eerie skeleton-like knight who had appeared before her. 6 months later, a messenger arrived from Egypt. Longspee had been hacked to death by Saracens on the day of the apparition. And then another segment showcases more information about the actual ghost that we were, or actually this little other segment has a photograph, and then it showcases some info. Here's what it says. This is the most famous medium Einar Nelson's seance photographs, and shows Queen Astrid of Denmark as she is supposed to have materialized. Queen Esther was killed in a car crash at Lucerne in 1935. Her subsequent appearances at Nielsen's Copenhagen seances were often witnessed. The photograph was taken by Lichblad, who wrote a book in defiance of church authorities testifying to the authenticity of the Queen's materialization. Many sitters were present when this picture was taken. Lichblad used 3 cameras, taking his pictures simultaneously with a white flash, and all the people present saw the materialization and the medium together. And then the last segment, the very final one of this chapter, is called Phantom Bride. Here's what it says. A lady dressed in brown has haunted Raymond Hall, a magnificent mansion near Fakenham, Norfolk, for more than 250 years. She has been seen by a king, shot at by a famous author, and even captured by a camera. The lady is believed to be Dorothy Walpole, sister of Sir Robert Walpole, who became Britain's prime minister in 1721, and her unhappy spirit is said to return because of a tragic love life. Dorothy's father, also a member of Parliament and also called Robert, became guardian to a young Viscount, Charles Townshend, when the lad was 13. As he and Dorothy grew up together, they fell in love, but they were denied permission to marry. Dorothy's father feared people would think the Walpoles were after the Townshend's fortunes, and so Charles left to find consolation in the arms of a baron's daughter and later married her. Dorothy drifted first to London, then Paris, drowning her sorrows in a reckless world of parties and eventually scandalizing high society by setting up home with a French lord. Then in 1711, news reached her that Charles's wife had died, and so she hurried home to Rainham, and 12 months later, the childhood lovers were married. For a while, they were blissfully happy. Then the bride's past caught up with her. Her husband was told of how she had lived in Paris. In a rage, he confined her to her rooms and ordered the servants to let no one in or out. When Dorothy died, aged 40, 10 years later, in 1726, the official cause was given as smallpox. But local rumors said she had been pushed from behind at the top of the hall's great staircase. Such gossip gained credence whenever the servants from Rainham revealed that her ghost was soon seen wandering the corridors of her old home. In 1786, the Prince Regent, later to become King George IV, was a guest at the hall. He woke one night to find a woman wearing brown standing beside his bed. Her hair was disheveled, her face ashen white. The royal visitor fled the room in his nightgown and nightcap and stormed through the house, rousing everyone with his wrath. He refused to stay an hour longer. Alarmed at upsetting such an honored guest, the Townsends ordered a nightly watch by servants and gamekeepers. A few nights later, the patrols sighted the lady in brown, but when one of the men moved into her path to challenge her, she walked straight through him. He felt an icy cloud pass into his bones and out again. The brown-clad specter cut short Christmas merrymaking at Rainham in 1835. Several guests left early after seeing her. Colonel Loftus, brother of then Lady Townshend, bumped into her on consecutive nights. He described her as a stately woman in a rich dress and cap. Her face was clearly defined, but she had black hollows instead of eyes. Dorothy's fame spread. Captain Frederick Marryat, the tough seagoing author of Mr. Mitchum's Easy and the Children of the New Forest, was invited to meet her for herself when he scoffed at the ghost stories. When he arrived at the hall, he was given a room where a portrait of Dorothy hung. It helped him recognize her late at night when he and 2 friends spotted her walking towards them down a corridor. They darted into a side room, but the lady stopped opposite the door and then gave them a wicked grin. Marryat was holding his pistol and fired a shot at the shape. It went straight through the still smiling specter and then smashed into the wooden door behind. In 1936, 2 professional photographers arrived at Rainham Hall to take pictures of the house for Lady Townshend. On the afternoon of September 19th, they were setting up their cameras at the foot of the staircase when one of them saw what appeared to be a cloud of vapor taking human shape. He shouted instructions to his colleague, who exposed the photographic plate without knowing why. When it was developed, the misty outline of a woman in a white gown and veil could be seen halfway down the stairs, and experts were convinced that this picture was not a fake. Had Dorothy Walpole decided to let the world see what she looked like on her wedding day 224 years earlier on the steps where some say she was pushed to her death? Then that's it. That wraps up part 6 of chapter 6, Ghost of Royals and Rulers, from the book The World's Greatest Ghost by Roger Bohr. Let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. So once again, lots of rich information associated with this book, with this part. First one that we talked about was the White Lady of Bohemia. Here you had a nice ghost, someone that was very caring, very loving, apparently to one of her long descendants, in this case the little baby boy named Peter. There she was, showing up at night consecutively is what it seemed like, picking him up, cradling him, making sure that she was all right. And then some of the nannies were okay with it afterwards because they didn't see her as a threat, and so they wouldn't really bother her. But then it took one nanny to essentially decide to almost challenge the ghost. That was kind of freaky whenever that happened, because apparently she walked right up to the ghost and took the baby right from the ghost's arm. By the way, that seems to make it also that this is the first time that I can recall in a long time that the ghost can take physical form. It was actually picking up a baby. It was picking up something with its hands. The only way to do that is if it's tangible, right? But it wasn't. It was a ghost, because then that ghost decided to make some remark about, do you know what you're doing, bold one? And then decided to disappear right into the wall, once again proving that it was a ghost. Pretty interesting stuff. And then the last part was the one associated with the Phantom Bride. The idea that this is a ghost as well that decided to make itself known, but this one was a little bit more tragic. Apparently this woman, in other words, had finally her long love, and she was able to marry him, but her past had caught up to her, and her love apparently decided they didn't like that, and so because of it, they basically kept her isolated, but kept her jailed up somewhere within that castle, and then she ended up dying under mysterious circumstances, apparently the smallpox, but it believed, in other words, to her having been pushed off of a staircase to her death instead. But either way, though, that ghost, this Phantom Bride, haunts that location, so much so that she haunted the future King George IV, and then was also there to showcase herself to other people that challenged her, including a captain who decided he wanted to meet her for herself, and he saw her. He even shot at her and shot straight through her, and all she did was just smile right back at him. And then finally a picture was taken of her as well that shows her within a wedding dress too. Interesting stuff. Great chapter. But that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with this chapter here. The next one I'm going to give a little brief introduction to. Chapter 7 is going to be called Ghostly Friends and Lovers. So you're going to see essentially what that is afterwards. All right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.